Welcome, your trusted resource for sustainability news. I'm your host, Reina Rose. Today's guest is Prachi Hardikar. Prachi is a sustainable aviation consultant who is working to build a cleaner and greener planet by analyzing, managing, and reducing impacts from aviation-related emissions on the environment. Originally, from the Indian IT hub, city of Pune, India, where she graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering, Prachi moved to Nantes, a city near the Atlantic coast of Western France in 2014, to complete a master's degree in project management and energy and environmental engineering. She then shifted to Toulouse, France, the aeronautics and aerospace capital of Europe, from where her career in aviation and environment really took off. Now based in Paris, Prachi has been working for the last 4 years in the niche field of sustainable aviation and has so far worked with Airbus, one of the world's leading commercial aircraft manufacturers, and Visa, a consultancy for aviation environmental solutions, and is currently with ADP Energy, the architectural and engineering consulting subsidiary for Group ADP Paris Airports. Prachi, it is so lovely to have you on the show today. I'm so excited to share with our audience your vast experience in sustainable aviation and the work you're doing to make sure that we remain connected to the people and places we love while caring for the planet at the same time.
Thanks so much for inviting me and having me on your show. And it's wonderful and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. In our conversations that we had before the show, I just was really enthralled by the knowledge you have and the experience that you have gained in private aviation and making sure that it's cleaner and greener, because it's so important that we both take care of the planet and at the same time still stay connected to one another. I mean, we want to go to the places we love and see the people we love, and we're in such an interconnected world that those people are usually a flight away these days. So tell me, and for you, I know in Paris, you know, your family must be a flight away in India as well. So you want to make sure that you can continue to visit them and then visit you without polluting the environment, right?
Yes, exactly. That's definitely an objective, yes.
So tell us a little bit about your journey. What has made you so passionate about creating a greener world and making aviation part of the solution instead of the problem?
So, you know, like you already mentioned, I was born and brought up in Pune, in India. And, you know, growing up, I always wanted to have a career in aerospace and aeronautics. I ended up doing a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and I thought, you know, I'd somehow specialize in aerospace. But growing up in India, you know, where environmental issues and climate change and topics like that are so important, my focus was shifted towards energy efficiency, environmental engineering. So that's why I moved to France to pursue a master's in engineering in environment and energy. But somehow, you know, as luck would have it, my first job, my first internship and my master thesis placement was with Airbus, which is in the aviation field. So, you know, I was very lucky to somehow be able to connect both my passions together and work for energy and emissions reductions in the aviation sector. So that's connecting environment and sustainability with aviation. So I'm really happy to be here.
That's incredible. Not that many people get a chance to combine their two very different passions, seemingly, right? There was such a long time when aviation was the problem, right? And still sometimes it is, but you were able to combine that passion with aeronautics with your passion for cleaning up the environment. And it's really the right time and place that is beginning to bring that into fruition, especially in Europe and the UK. There's so many laws right now that are actually mandating carbon neutral emissions by 2050. So this is a good time to be in this industry.
Yes, definitely. And as you know, there has been a lot of trending for flight shaming and flick scam, as they call it. That has been trending the last year. And of course, you know, Greta Thunberg, she's succeeded in mobilizing and creating awareness. So, you know, the focus has been on aviation since the last year, especially related to environmental concerns. So So definitely environmental and sustainability in aviation is at the forefront, is one of the hot topics for aviation today. And even going forward, after coronavirus, the governments and policymakers, they are talking about a green recovery from coronavirus. So that's putting environment at the core strategy for recovering from this health crisis and financial crisis.
Absolutely, especially, when there was hardly any planes flying for a while and people weren't going to the beaches, and we've seen the earth recover so quickly, right? We've seen turtles be born and plastic be taken out of the earth, and the skies clear up. I live in Los Angeles, and that we saw no smog for mostly because the cars also were off the roads for a while. And so I've been hearing a lot of business and economy recovery strategies, particularly in EU and UK, that have what they call green strings attached. So we'll help you recover your business, but let's move the environment forward while we're at it.
Yes, definitely.
So I want to talk to you about the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program, the ACA. How exactly does that work? What airports are participating in that? And then what is your role as an individual, as a company in that?
So the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program was launched way back in 2009 in Europe by Airports Council International. And then over the years, it sort of expanded to all the regions in the world. Today, there are over 300 airports in all continents, more than 70 countries that have been certified, that have been accredited under this program. And it's definitely, more and more airports are joining the scheme. But just to explain what exactly it is, the focus of the program is on making airports calculate and manage their carbon footprint. So that's basically a measure of the greenhouse gas emissions that result from an airport's activity. So as an airport, we do have different sources of emissions that are present on site. We have boilers, we have furnaces, we have airport vehicles, on the air side, we have ground support equipment as well. Electricity purchases are a huge part of the emissions. So the strategy is to have an audit of these energy sources to calculate the consumption and then calculate the emissions that result from such activities. And building on this, the Airport Carbon Accreditation Program, it brings into place an environmental policy, emission reduction targets, and carbon management plans to sort of reduce an airport's emissions over the years. And of course, there are other aspects to this program, working with stakeholders, reducing stakeholder emissions, other third parties that are present at airports. So that goes a long way in achieving sustainability at the airport level.
Are there any things that are kind of a surprise? I remember I was talking to an energy auditor one time, and they were saying when they're looking at buildings, something as simple as making sure there's no gap underneath the doors that allows the air conditioner to escape can save so much money and energy for a building that and these are the things I was very surprised to find out. Are there some little things that when you're doing an energy audit you find in the airports that make a big difference?
Yes, there are very simple measures that go a long way in reducing energy consumption and emissions. For example, replacing obsolete equipment or replacing your lighting, your fluorescent lighting with, more efficient LED lights. That's definitely one of the simplest ways and easiest ways. Using automated sensors that detect if people are present in the room or not, and depending on that, they either switch on or switch off. That goes a long way as well. And of course, you have more complicated measures that say, such as improving insulation, reducing the gaps between, windows and doors, or having materials that have better thermal properties. And this is, one of the more complicated steps is to incorporate renewables. So you can actually even install solar panels on the airport. Airports have such vast amounts of land and so many buildings, so it's very easy to incorporate solar energy on airport land.
Yeah, that's incredible. And the wonderful thing, especially about those measures, like you were talking about replacing the lights and closing the gaps between the doors and windows. These are simple things that actually save the company a lot of money on top of energy. So it's economically viable as well as good for the planet.
Yes, definitely. It's energy savings always result in financial savings. So that should be one of the best motivators for any airport, any industry, any company to go for energy efficiency measures, even if there is some amount of investment that's needed upfront.
Right, because you're going to be saving on the back end for sure.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
when you're determining airport energy efficiency, is those factors you just told us that you look for, some of the things, what all do you look for when you're determining energy efficiency?
So the methodology that we use can be to usually have energy consumption over the last few years. So we kind of know the trends. If we do see certain emissions are rising without any cause, then that's definitely, a point of concern. If not, we start with vehicles, replacing, conventional vehicles by even electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. That goes a long way in reducing emissions related to mobility, as we call it. Secondly, furnaces easily be replaced by sources such as biomass or other renewables, and incorporating other efficiency measures is definitely easy.
Helpful, yes. So without getting too much into, I know we talked about maybe talking about fuel efficient aircraft and things like that. I know that as I've spoken to different companies who have developed electric aircraft, for instance, you're talking about electric vehicles being used on the airfield. They're saying it actually brings the costs down to flying, especially people who maybe, especially during COVID, want to fly privately because they don't want to be exposed. I've actually been around 2 people who've been exposed by flying commercial just recently. And they were saying that as we get these electric aircraft in the air, the cost of flying private is going to come down so much because charging the aircraft costs so much less than buying fuel for the aircraft. And you're also able to fly directly into these smaller airports. Do you see more smaller airports being used as we begin to bring a sustainable future forward?
So there was definitely a debate going on whether, the future of aviation is in large airport hubs, or whether the connectivity should be reaching even small cities and smaller towns, such as regional airports. In France, there is a trend for even small airports to be sustainable, to be environmental friendly. A lot number of them are even in the airport carbon accreditation program, but one of the main concerns with smaller airports is the investment and the finance and the resources that they have, whether they are financial resources or whether they are human power. So the first step that sort of blocks sustainability in smaller airports is this investment that is needed, and we need to be open about that fact. But if not, like I said, in the long run, sustainability is definitely going to be cost effective, is definitely going to result in monetary savings. So bringing in all these measures, even if they cost now, would be beneficial in the long run.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to stay ahead of the curve on this. I was watching someone who talks a lot about financials the other day, and they were saying, when we made the transition from horses to cars, people were hesitant at first. There's an investment to get into cars. But if you stayed with horses, at some point, you weren't going to have anybody to buy your horseshoes or to buy your buggy whips. And so making that initial investment to transition over to the automobile was so important in those times. And I think we're at a crossroad that's similar right now, that we need to make the transition to alternative fuels, to sustainable vehicles, and to making the transition also, like you said, that's money savings in our buildings, and making sure that every piece of it is sustainable. And we see many companies today committing to make sure that all their operations are sustainable. And so going to these sustainable airports would be part of that commitment, I think, making sure we use some of them. So tell me, who is responsible for controlling aircraft emissions? And is there anything as the public that we can do to affect change in that area?
So aircraft emissions actually result from, well, depending on where the aircraft is. For example, if the aircraft is at the gate and is taxiing towards the runway and waiting for takeoff, or it has just landed, so those part of the emissions directly impact the local air quality at the airport. Whereas if the aircraft is in cruise mode, it's flying between two airports and it's at 35,000, 40,000 feet, then those emissions are, just in the atmosphere, in international territory even, so there is definitely this division between where the emissions are located, and depending on that, we do have different measures to manage them.
That makes sense. And then I guess a lot of local governments, especially in Europe and the UK, they have been bringing policies to help reduce these emissions. Even I know that when I was flying on a Gulfstream aircraft privately in France, actually, I remember them having, much tighter restrictions on how long we could run the engines before takeoff, and how, when you can turn your aircraft on, when you're allowed to run these engines, how long after you've landed that you're allowed to keep the engines on. And if you broke any of those rules, you would be heavily fined. And at the time, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know a lot about sustainability. And I just thought, well, I need more time to get the aircraft ready, or we need to get it cold for the passengers, or, you're restricting us, what's going on? But now I realize these restrictions were because we're just emitting tons and tons of CO2 into the air by keeping our engines on longer. And so they've created regulations to make sure that we can at least, if we run our engine half the time, we're cutting that emission in half.
Yes, definitely. And there are even the equipment called as the auxiliary power unit, which is located in the aircraft, that actually powers the aircraft, gives the electrical power necessary in the cabin, as well as air conditioning. So that is responsible as well for a lot of emissions. So just replacing that and using fixed ground power instead, that's that's electricity based. So that's in fact even powered by renewables, for example, that goes a long way in reducing local air quality, local emissions at the airport. Then reducing taxiing times as well. So that's, you're spending less amount of time going from the gate and waiting before takeoff is cleared. So reducing that amount of time, having better operational efficiency at the airport. Those are some of the ways in which aircraft emissions can be reduced.
Right. I remember you speaking about air traffic management and managing those taxi times and the ways that the traffic is managed in order to create less emissions that way too. So there's such a multifaceted way to reduce emissions in aviation. I didn't think, I've always thought about, sustainable fuels, which we may have a few minutes to get to. I've thought about, electrifying aircraft and these different things, but I never thought about the airport itself and creating more efficiency within each airport, as well as even managing the traffic better, so that probably that there's less go-arounds, as they're waiting to, I know that sometimes we had to go around the airport and wait because the air traffic hadn't been managed well.
Yes.
And so the amount of fuel you're spending to take a loop around the airport that's unnecessary it's really astronomical how much waste there can be.
Yes, definitely. That is one of the objectives of air traffic management. In fact, just to have better flight plans and better en route flight efficiency, and have airspace that is without restrictions. So the additional kilometers or the distance that's flown between two airports is reduced. So you have sort of a direct flight path.
And that's another thing I think that Europe has really been leading. Again, I remember, we'd have block times in Europe that we didn't ever have to think about in the US, because in the US we were a little bit unmanaged. You know, you could just take off when you wanted to. However, the block times in Europe made sure that when we landed at the location we were going to land at, that we could go straight in and there wasn't going to be any holding pattern before we touched down. And so, yeah, Europe has really been leading the way on this, and I hope that we can really follow the lead that Europe has started in clean aviation and bring that here to the States too.
Yes, definitely.
So
Europe is...
Yes?
No, sorry, you were just cut.
No, go on. Europe was what?
Yes, Europe. I was going to say Europe does have a lot of investment going on in these innovative projects to open up the airspace and reduce these airspace restrictions. But at the same time, I do believe the U.S. is having some programs as well in the same field. So they're kind of there's something to learn from both areas, I believe, and from one another. Definitely.
Absolutely. And I do know that several airports in the US, we have been adopting the sustainable fuels, SAF, sustainable aviation fuels. And I know that San Francisco Airport has. I visited the private airport here in Van Nuys, and they're bringing on a large shipment of SAF as well. Tell us, what is the role of SAF, the sustainable aviation fuels, in creating a cleaner path to aviation?
So sustainable aviation fuels are produced from biological origin sources such as agricultural waste or fats, oils, residues, and even some recycled waste, So when they are blended with conventional jet A1 fuels and they are used in aircraft, they are effectively cutting down emissions, because what's biogenic in origin is carbon neutral. First, I think the best case scenario is having up to 85% more efficiency with biofuels, with sustainable aviation fuels than with just conventional jet A1. And sustainable aviation fuels are one of the most promising ways to decarbonize the sector at the moment.
Absolutely, because even with the advances in electrical aviation, it looks like we're only going to be having flights up to maybe 500 nautical miles, which is about half of the flights worldwide are under 500 miles. However, those long range flights, which are really the carbon emitters, are probably going to be on liquid fuels for quite a long time. So having these sustainable fuels to power those flights is going to be instrumental in keeping aviation to be carbon neutral, and hopefully one day, to be completely net zero.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
So last question, and I thank you so much for your coming on the show. I just really enjoyed chatting with you. And, you have been so progressive in your career. You're still young and you're out there and you're changing the world. And I just applaud you for the work you're doing. And so if people are out there and they're saying, okay, so there's sustainable fuels, there's airports that are trying to become more sustainable, what is my impact in this? How can I maybe have a voice to choose aircrafts maybe that use that, or airlines that use the sustainable fuels? Is there a way to choose airports that are accredited? How can the public look into ways that they can be more sustainable in the air?
Well, definitely you do know which airports are accredited. You can also choose to fly certain aircraft which are more efficient, which are cleaner, which consume less fuel. That kind of data is available as well. And in the end, the price also translates down to your ticket, whether you're willing to pay those extra $5 in order to offset emissions that are related to your own air travel. So the idea is to keep flying, but to pollute less. So I think if each one of us contributes to offsetting emissions that result from our flights, then, from our personal flights, then that would go a long way in helping the sector and the global industry, the aviation industry in general.
And the subject actually of offsetting, that can be a little controversial. I've been talking to a few people. Now, let us know. No, offsetting is usually right. That they'll plant some trees because of your flight. Is that the kind of offsetting you're talking about?
Yes. For example, generally in France, even when I take a train or I take a flight, I think these days they do end up telling you on your ticket that these are the carbon emissions that are associated due to your ticket, you know, because of your seat on a flight or in the train. And then there are websites where you can go to and you can decide where you can buy the amount of offsets that are necessary to neutralize the emissions that resulted from your travel. So this could be a lot of things. This could be planting trees. This could be investing or, you know, buying credits from renewable sources in developing nations. It could be many projects. It's entirely your choice, but and it's voluntary, of course. But this idea and this mindset needs to be there these days. That you know, you're environmentally conscious of your choices.
Absolutely. And I think more people and more companies are truly becoming environmentally conscious about what they're doing. So Prachi, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for watching, and make sure to take care of the planet. See you next time.